Welcome, everybody, to our sixth episode of the Empowered Defender here at DarkLight, the Cyio Chronicles. Today, we have with us Paul Patrick, our Executive Vice President, um, and he's going to go through a little bit about Cyio, its capabilities, and its place in the market, why we developed the tool, and really what makes it special here at DarkLight. Paul, before we get into it, I'll pass it over to you for a brief intro, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us today, Thomas. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for the last few years trying to help Darklight and moving us to a place to address the spot in the marketplace that has been, for the most part, kind of ignored. And really, it's the how do we help businesses really start to look at the threats associated with them, the risks that create those threats, and but look at it not in the context of vulnerability, but look at it in the context of the risk to the business. And so doing that's been really important. It's allowed me to pull on a lot of disciplines. Again, I've been doing this for way over 40 years and over 20 years in the security industry, and pulling this all together and being able to leverage all that different background and that my experience working with enterprise Fortune 500 type customers and understanding their problems and how we can take and bring that together, build something that's not only just cutting edge, but also scalable and powerful, things like that. So again, I've been at this for a long time, but it really has been fun.
No, Paul, I mean, absolutely. Some of the biggest takeaways out of that bio, if I were to really think about it, 40 years of experience developing, commercial products. That puts you in a small category of other people that have that stature.
Yeah.
But then when you parallel that or combine it, if you will, with your 21 patents, you're definitely a subject matter expert. You're an innovator in the field. So one, we're excited to obviously have you here driving Cyio, but just in general, the market is lucky to have people like you. Let's get into it, right? Let's just kind of just pull back the covers and get into Cyio a little bit. So if we were to look at it, can you provide an overview of the technology behind Cyio and how it differs from traditional cybersecurity solutions?
Well, again, I think what I can start with is, again, when we started to build Cyio, you can treat it like a classic kind of expert system from the past, in the 70s and 80s and such. But we kind of took a different slant here. And the first thing we realized is we got to be able to fuse data together. That is kind of quintessential. It's fundamental in what we do. And to do that means you really have to understand what is the data, how does it relate, and more importantly, what questions are people going to want to ask against that data? So to that extent, what we did is we actually took a page out of some of the early days of AI and we used semantic graphs. We used RDF, which is the resource description framework, to actually capture a formal ontology. And in fact, it's a set of ontologies that represent the data model. And from that, we can see how data is interlinked and connected together, at which point you can now formulate what are the kind of questions we can now answer. That gives us some flexibility in comparison to, again, more traditional approaches that have been used with various degrees of success using relational databases or columnar databases and things like that. But you might say, well, what's so magical about using a semantic graph? And again, I would take you back to one of the classic challenges we've seen in the past, in my past, with relational has been the problem of, gee, I need to add something. I've got to change something in the structure, not in the data element, but in the structure of the data. And you end up having to go through an expensive ETL process, the extraction, the transformation, and the reloading. Whereas in the graph, I can add another predicate. And the predicate can point to yet another thing or hold another value, and it's easily to evolve. That makes it very powerful. The second thing it does, though, that also comes to bear is by having the graph with very clear semantics. Again, this is not just a bunch of fields. There's really detailed descriptions about what they mean and the like. And building upon models like NIST OSCAL, NIST 7693 for assets, 8286, the RMF, the NIST RMF. By taking all these models and sticks and things like that, putting them together, we're able to actually represent an enterprise at an amazing level of detail. And because we have that foundation, we're now in a position where we can leverage things like inferencing. We can begin to look for the things that are buried in the noise that the human can't see due to all the noise. and have the inference engine actually connect the pieces together as we go forward. That's kind of some of the more fundamental pieces that this kind of technology and this kind of approach addresses in comparison to the other type of classic approaches.
Paul, that's a really good point, and I like the way that you outlined that. And when I think about it from the consumer's perspective, I really like to think about, scalability with inside of the organizations. Most people consume software in bite-sized pieces, and then they continue to grow with it with inside their organization as it's part of the learning curve for the team. Now, with the semantic knowledge graph, and that capability helping drive that innovation, fostering that data input and enrichment for the team, that learning curve seems like it would also kind of be shorter, right? That scalability would be, much, much quicker timeline for the team to take advantage of.
Well, primarily it's evolution, I think, is really the Thomas, which we're kind of alluding to here. The
Mhm.
ability for us to say, great, we need to expand our aperture. We need to capture another portion of the enterprise, say its external facing side, like in the attack surface space.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness, there are all new types there that aren't in the inside looking side, right? And so we can easily adapt and pick that stuff up. And it automatically and helps us quickly do these kind of things and evolve the model without going, oh my goodness, we got to make all these other changes that we have to pull apart, reload, and then worse, go to our customers and say, well, we need to take the system down so we can extract your data so we can load it back in. Right. So you don't want to do those kind of interruptions. And the semantic graph makes that a really powerful capability for us to do. As for scale, again, I cut my teeth, as you saw in the bio, working at people who built enterprise software systems,
Right.
enterprise levels, Fortune 500 type levels. And so everything is an integration through a database. It literally is, how do you break up the system? How do you architect the system in such a way to have pieces that are running in the background that communicate together? It's a system of systems approach. And that's part of the way that we allow our systems to scale. And rather than everything dumped into one store, it's just an approach that we took because it gives us more flexibility and actually helps our customers.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a solid point. Again, I really wanted to hit on the semantic knowledge graph because it did make sense that as you were looking to enhance and continue to bring in that data and just make it, more user friendly, that is a huge part of that data enhancement. As we continue to look at it, Paul, how does Cyio enhance risk management framework using the latest cybersecurity trends and information?
Okay. Well, again, I think one of the other things in spending some time working with government agencies and that, and intelligence community, Department of Defense, and that, you begin to realize the value of data, the source value of data, where are trusted sources and such, and how data fits together. I'm old enough to have lived through 9/11 and understood the ever popular key phrase, connect the dots, and what that really meant. And that's what we mean by fusion, really connect the dots.
Yep.
So what we realize is, again, as the 3-star I used to report to would tell me, and so offense has to inform defense. You got to understand what the bad guy's doing to better put yourself in a position to defend yourself. The other thing is being able to also figure out, where, the kind of information you're going to get is going to change. So the cybersecurity space is an ever-changing place. And as such, you need an infrastructure that makes evolution easy to do, and with as few impediments as possible. And that's what the graph really lets us do. We can bring in new types. I don't have to build new tables. I don't have to do new joins and things like that. I can create objects. I can add predicates, remove predicates, create new links. I can actually expand the model without disrupting everything else that we have going on. So that makes it possible to bring in new threat intel sources, whether they be in industry standard formats like sticks and such, whether they be in proprietary formats, because often a lot of the exploit data, there's not a good, solid and industry standard for representing that information. So this allows us to pull in from multiple different sources, normalize the data into this data model that is consistent and across our enterprise and our data systems.
And Paul, that's a really big piece. as you look at it, right, in the cybersecurity field in general, you really do have to have a good offense to prepare your defense, understanding what attackers are going to do and what that looks like. Not only having your subject matter experts being open to that information and them individually continuing to evolve their skill set, but then when you incorporate a tool like Cyio into that, where not only are they aware of the industry, but the tool is bringing in additional threat feeds, as you mentioned, whether it's something that you guys are monitoring internally inside of your organization, or if they're just industry standards, right? And it's continuously updating that environment. And from my perspective, when you were to tie it back to that offense as a defense, when you're pulling up the biggest risk that are happening, within the last 30 days that are currently being exploited, that might not necessarily be a critical on your vulnerability scan. But when you go and you get that information combined with EPSS and KEV and those other threat feeds, if you will, well, then now you can actually make that information actionable and reduce your risk. So that's really insightful when you think about how we're taking that information and applying it.
Well, your example, again, you mentioned EPSS, KEP. Those are brand new data sources that only in the last couple of years came about.
Right.
Okay? And so they become new pieces of information, and they tell us things. Like take the EPSS score, for example. It's telling us, is exploits being actively used in the environment, and what's the probability of them being used? Okay. Well, that's all great data. And a lot of folks are now learning to take advantage of all this stuff and putting it in their UI.
Right.
The problem that we also try to focus on is the issue of we don't assume that the person sitting at the console looking at the Cyio screen is a seasoned cybersecurity analyst type person. Okay, there are, as we've seen in all the press and all the news stories going on, right? There aren't enough of those people out there. So one of the other things that we're trying to do is we take that kind of data and we go ahead and incorporate it into our calculations for risk scores and things like that.
Yeah.
Kind of, if you will, is a tagline from my past, something we tried to do. We're trying to take those folks responsible for cyber with lower skill levels and get them in a position and provide them the kind of capabilities allows them to operate at a higher level of proficiency. What that does is then allows the more skilled people, of which you have nowhere near enough in an enterprise typically, if you have any,
Yeah.
to now be freed up to look at things that really only the human mind and an expert needs, rather than looking at all the stuff and even the low level mundane things. And when you do that, things like incorporating KEV and EPSS into your scoring algorithms, you begin to see, yeah, great. If it were to get hit, it's, if I were to get hit by this thing, it's a really high score. But when I take the probabilities and I add it to it, it drops to the bottom of my list. It's
Right.
not the big thing. And then when you incorporate that with what are my thresholds, or if you will, the levels that I'm willing to, of risk I'm willing to accept, and being able to compare that, because you're now looking at the risks not from a patch or device, but actually from what's the risk to the business if this were to be successfully exploited, financially, legally, reputationally, those kind of things. And now you've got something that is much more tuned to where should you focus your efforts with regards to the highest risk to the business, not necessarily to the asset. And that's another very different approach that I see in the news and some of the new, more recent announcements, and even Gartner is starting to recognize it's about the risk to the business. It's not necessarily just about the asset.
And Paul, I mean, that's a really great point, is for organizations to start to understand the difference between just a pure vulnerability and a risk overall, and what that impact is to the overall organization. Because it's not one standalone, it's a correlation between the two. That's really what you need to prioritize. And I like that philosophy moving forward for businesses to take that holistic view to that prioritization process.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to walk away and think Paul doesn't believe that vulnerabilities and VM is important. It's critical. It's an absolute critical thing. Think of this like puzzles and pieces. It's another piece in the puzzle. It gives us another view, just like attack surface management does, just like asset inventories do. When you start putting those pieces together, you get a more holistic picture of the environment and the risk to your environment. than you do if you deal with one piece of the puzzle and only one piece of the puzzle.
Paul,
That was the
I like
information that just went off in our head when we started down this path. That we've got to help solve this problem.
right. And a good way that I kind of describe that visualization for customers is if you were to look at a 2D rendering of the information that you were getting versus a 3D holistic view, it's kind of that next level of information to give you that whole actual snapshot of your environment and what that risk really means to your business. Because
Well,
you have to manage exceptions, right? That's got to be part of that philosophy.
well, you also bring up another interesting aspect that I want to touch on. The other thing that, again, you spend time in the trenches, rolling up your sleeves, getting dirty with the folks that are actually doing this for a living. You begin to realize, depending upon the role they're in, their relationship to the responsibility for security, there is no one size fits all,
Correct.
right? There are those in the IT department that are really, for example, very focused on fix the asset, okay? And to them, being able to look at it from where is it, whether it be a device or whether it be software, to be able to pivot from one to the next, but start with that risk view in the bigger picture of, I've got these risks. Where are they? They're on a device? Well, wait a minute. Are they really on the device? So I'll give you a classic example. We've helped a couple of customers as they bring on some of their new clients. These are MSPs, MSSPs type folks. And the first thing that happens, they get the customer in, they do their first scan, and it's just, oh my God, it's a sea of severity, just high severity. You go, well, where the heck do you start? I got 50, hot severity highs. Well, wait a minute. Let's look at it from another standpoint. Let's go see if the risks are in fact clustered. Well, how can you do that? Well, I actually can look at it from a device standpoint, except that devices will give me a view that really has a hard time clustering. It's how many is on this asset versus that asset. A more powerful view is to actually switch and look at what's all the software assets in my environment and what risks are in each of those. Now, what happens, the risk will cluster on the software products, but even better, if you look at the software products, you can begin to see a trend that can occur where you see, well, it's 8 different things, which are the highest ones, but they're all from the same vendor. Perhaps, and I'm not to pick on Microsoft, perhaps I need to run Windows Update because, boy, that would clean out a whole lot of these really quick. And all of a sudden, the sea of overwhelmingness of looking at this long list of severity high risks can get cut down into something more reasonable where you can actually start to look at the other aspects, how it affects your business and such. So being able to, and you mentioned about 3D, I actually think of it like a cube, and I'll show my age here and talk about a Rubik's Cube. Except all the colors are on each side. They're not mixed. But the whole idea, think about it. I'm looking at the blue side because I'm an IT person. I want to see it by the devices. Why? Because I've got to go fix them.
Right.
Okay. I'm a security analyst. I may look at it from the red side. I want to know what threats there are and from where they're coming from. I may be somebody else in a different role who's looking at from software side. And again, one of the core things I want to know there is, well, wait a minute. How many of these risks are because I've got unsupported software or I've got software that's misconfigured? Well, see, no one view necessarily gives you that answer, which is unfortunate because now you can move around. And so what we try to show is the customers, they're different audiences within their org, and they can work how they want to work, but they're looking at one unified model of data, not multiple different models that are completely disconnected.
Paul, and that's a really big point and differentiator from my perspective of us here at DarkLight with Cyio is being able to take those lists and cut them out by device or by software, so you can really identify and quickly move through, a log4j, a patch update, whatever it is that needs to be handled or mitigated, if you will. It allows you to make that actionable and timely instead of it, costing your team a bunch of cycles to get that information handled. That's a really good point.
Yeah. The other one that goes into that one to kind of close off on this topic,
Yeah.
Thomas, is one of the other things is looking at devices and software talk about are more tactical kind of things that one would go and touch. Very much the how do I fix it kind of problem. Right. In the whole process of doing which things should I focus on first, not just based on scores and EPS and things like that. The other thing is understanding what is this asset or collection of assets? What business function does it support? And how important is that business function to the presence of the operation of the business, right? If I were to not perform that business function, how would it impact my ability to service my customers and such, right? We encapsulate that in something, a concept we refer to as an information system. And the information system allows us to say, classic one in everybody's environment, an HR system, a payroll system, which may not be on-prem, maybe off of the cloud, it's third party, but you have devices that touch it. You've got devices that have software that interact with it and things like that. And what you can do in our information system is actually capture those relationships and the impact given on the type of information. Because the bad guy's not after your laptop for the sake of the laptop. It's after the information that's on it. He's after your servers with the information on it, the data that's moving by. How can I get that data and exfil it, and what can I do with that kind of thing? So then you can get down and start talking about, wow, what is all the information? How sensitive is that information? And what would I do? How would I react as a business if that information were compromised, depending upon whether it's the confidentiality, whether it's an integrity or an availability kind of concept? And being able to then incorporate that and be able to see your assets and your risks in the light of that information system gives you a better idea about how to look at risk as a whole from a business standpoint rather than at the asset level.
And that's a really good point. And the nice part about it, to parallel that a little bit more into the actual visualization within Cyio, is you can actually pull that up and share that information with your team, basically saying, this is the executive team devices. These are who are on that executive team, and what, software, what risks to our business are we going to quickly be able to identify by being on those devices. Before we pivot with that idea, Paul, if I'm an end user, right, and I'm building out some SOPs around my executive team, around my fleet, what have you, what can exceptions or, playbook things might I want to put together ahead of time, knowing that, QuickBooks is attached to the executive team? What are your thought processes about them?
Well, again, I think so many enterprises these days outsource some of their core business functions to outside. Again, whether it be payroll and HR type capabilities with a vendor like Gusto, for example, or whether it be or often QuickBooks, it's still part of your attack surface.
Yep.
It's still part of your infrastructure. If you think about it, you're now in a virtual enterprise. It's not constrained by walls anymore. It's a virtual enterprise. And so why would you not incorporate that into your overall risk model and the risks associated with that? Because you also want to know, did someone like that get hit? Was your data leaked? It's important to know that. And so part of the act of capturing those kind of things as information systems inside of Cyio is you actually are building out if you will, a virtual view of your enterprise and all the assets that make it up. And it allows you to start thinking about, are there doors and windows, to use the old house metaphor, right? I didn't realize we had. I didn't think about them that way. So it allows you to capture those things so that we can take it into advantage. So great. That's how I'd answer that one. Is again, the age-old problem is, do you actually know what you have?
Yeah,
that's a really hard problem. And we're working and looking at partnerships and things like that to make the automation of collecting that stuff a lot easier. But rather than saying, well, if you can't do it with the push button, you just can't do it. No, it's not. We've created infrastructure so that you can actually augment what you see in your scans with your own experts.
Yeah, and I mean, that goes back to the old saying, good data in, good data out. So us being able to apply that logic and continue to infuse that data for these teams is really impactful to the market.
Yep.
Well, what specific features does Cyio offer for managing cyber risks, right? We've kind of talked about risks, priorities, and vulnerabilities, but the cyber risks, and how does it prioritize managing these risks over vulnerabilities or in conjunction with?
Well, again, so vulnerabilities are just one sort of risk, right? There are, and the majority of those come in through ingested scans, right? No big surprise. But you have other risks. You have controls that are in place. Are they being effective? Those kinds of things that we're now starting to allow you to collect and put into the system as well. But again, this is where a bit of tradecraft comes into play. Okay. How do you know? Okay, I got all this data. What really makes sense to connect together? So again, we've looked at this, and based on some work that's been done at NIST, as well as some other folks that we've been working with, kind of come up with, I got a vulnerability score if it's a technical based kind of thing. I think a lot of people forget, tornadoes and hurricanes are also risks. Power outages are risks and that. And so there's environmental stuff. Then we got bad guys and actually doing, ransomware and stuff like that. So we've tried to build our model in such a way that we have vulnerability risks, we have threat risks, we have business impact, and we have again, aspects like that we now incorporate into our overall formula to determine prioritization of risk. And as users start to do things like use information model, what data is where, how sensitive, or what's your threshold for risk, being able to incorporate that into that equation so that it's not a vulnerability score. It's not exclusively a vulnerability score. It is an aspect, one of many that go into that one. So again, as you list, it really is, it's likelihood of impact. There's a lot of things, even under those two things, that comes out when you start to look at it. So again, that's the kind of stuff that we're incorporating into our model, into our scoring system and such. And at the same time, the answer was 7. No, with the new UI that we're working on, you can literally click on it and see how we came up with what we came up with and be able to drill in, because that's the other core thing. How do we help educate people? So it's not take our word for it. It's like, here's the facts. And you can draw your own conclusion and say, nope, we're wrong. And we're looking at how we could potentially allow that kind of bias or comment feedback to be put in so that can be incorporated and such, so that we can build something that is very tuned to your environment without building custom code.
Paul, you're spot on. I mean, being able to provide the why and the how to these business decisions of remediation or accepting risk, that's a huge part of being able to come up with a strong cybersecurity hygiene posture and being able to know that from top down, you really have hands on your environment. One of the things that I really loved about what you were saying there, Paul, is that it just continues to reinforce the realness of what we're developing here at DarkLight is the likelihood times impact being the risk to your business. And that's what you're talking about, right? Whether it's nation states, whether it's being currently exploited, whether it's a business threat, whether it's a vulnerability from a scan, all of those different things all come together and they help to determine what really is the business risk that you're dealing with. And that helps you to make logical, timely, executable decisions. So I thought that was well placed, Paul. My next question for you is, can you elaborate on how integrations with existing security infrastructure within an organization?
Well, again, having spent a lot of time in the enterprise shops, I can tell you, I haven't found anyone. The holy grail is one screen to look at, and yet, there's no one product that does it all. And so you've got an integration thing. So one of the things that we've done is again, because of the way that we look at things, our design philosophies of that, we actually model things, including integrations, as real live objects that we then use for configuration information so that we can easily integrate different kinds of things and then allow the customer to pick, given a technology, right? Like ticketing. I want to do ticketing. Okay. Do you need, we have integration with any number of popular ticketing systems today, in a one-way type form, a push ticket form. You can pick which one. You can tell us who should be copied, things like that. And again, we make it extensible and tailorable. But there's also another hidden feature in the system that we have, and that's an API. I don't normally talk about the API a lot, even though I spend most of my time in it. But I don't talk about the API a lot because most everyone has an API. But what you could do with ours is very much, it's very object centric. It actually leverages GraphQL, so it's programming language independent. It's strongly typed, And you're or the requester are in control of how much detail comes back versus the server writer who doesn't know anything about your business or your use case.
Mhm.
So that was why we went down that path. And we have found that a lot of people don't need a deep integration. They just need, I need to add, because I got a problem. I've got 3 other products and they calls them by 4 different names. I need a place like, how can I integrate that in one spot? And it was a little simple thing that they threw together fairly quickly using our API, and they now have one spot, and then could say, "Oh, I could see all the aliases that this is known by when I'm looking at my other dashboards." Well, that's kind of a superficial type approach, but that gives you the basis of. Again, we have full-time or bit-time integrations
Mhm.
where we have to do code, and we tend to abstract them because we support multiple different backends for certain things. But on top of that, we also have the API, and we can use that. And we have partnerships, technology partnerships, to help make the integration of other types of technology that's out there or other vendor implementations into a seamless, unified approach.
And Paul, that's the right answer. I like to think about it in the idea of people moving away from that silver bullet product that's going to be the end all be all, that's going to handle everything. Because it's not going to come in a way that's going to be consumable from the market because there's subject matter experts per company. Each company is really good at whatever they specifically do. And where organizations are able to really excel in those environments, and it's where they don't have a stack of 145 tools specifically, but where they have a solid collection of a security stack that their team is able to effectively use, and the data transfer between them is seamless. That's what I've seen as the most effective, and that's what I appreciate about our open API is, look, we know the data and the value that we're bringing to a team, but if we can enhance the process that you guys already have in place because you're using X, Y, or Z specific software, but as you mentioned, you only need to bring in a piece of it, fantastic. Because as you mentioned, naming conventions across these other products, they get all over the place as we're talking about the same, piece of hardware, if you will. And that really throws a loop in it. So it is nice to be able to, get some correlation, if you will, across those different scans. I appreciate that API side too. All right. Before we wrap it up, one last question here for you, Paul. What steps does DarkLight take to ensure privacy and security of customer data within its within its platform?
Yeah, again, we started right off day one with multi-tenant capability, because we're a SaaS-based approach. Each tenant is physically separated. So we don't have any commingling of data that needs to be, you know, taken and filtered out and things like that. And so again, we don't have any leak over and that kind of stuff. So basically in traditional database terms, you could call it a shard, you can call it a partition, but it is a physical separation that we do. And that data is all kept. There's no way for you to get across the security controls to make sure that no one can one org see another org's data.
Absolutely. And the nice feature, whether you're a commercial user or an MSSP serving clients, is that within the dashboard, you yourself can filter through those different, organizations, but none of the customers are going to be able to see anything but their information. And it gives you that snapshot to quickly be able to pivot between those and collect that data. Paul, thanks for walking through that. I actually do want to hit on one last thing. How does Cyio help organizations visualize and understand their security posture through its reporting feature? One of the things that I've noticed is the biggest challenge for the security teams is a lot of the time the executive team doesn't necessarily speak the same language. And so how can Cyio help take this complex data set of information and make it consumable by the executive teams?
Well, yeah, we have some basic dashboarding type capabilities that literally sum up. But one of the cool things about the dashboarding is they're fully customizable.
Yeah.
You choose what data you want to put in there. Is it a pie chart, a bar chart, whatever? You can then go and click on those and export them as PNG, so you can include them in your PowerPoint presentations to the board and things like that. That we have a security assessment report, which is the impact of as you do ingest and that you do an assessment. You'll notice I didn't call it a scan because of assessment. It can include scans, it can include interviews with people, it can include any number of things. But the assessment report, so that you can actually see what risks you've got, where are the risks, have they been taken care of, are they not able to be taken care of, and what's the inventory of things. But we found the other thing that we quickly found is anyone in the compliance world has a problem. It does a really nice reports, but they don't meet CMMC or whatever the app, the flavor of the day is to what you want. So we actually have the ability to export the contents of the system in a JSON format according to the NIST OSCAL specification. And so now you can take it and customize whatever the heck you want, because you have access to all the data that we have having to do with that to create whatever custom report you might want, or custom ingest into something else. And then if you need something a little more narrow or fine grained, again, we always have the API. You can always go in there and do things with the API and pull out a specific slice or sliver of what it is you want to be able to do. So in the box versus customized without you doing tremendous amount of extra work.
And that's the biggest part of this type of solution to the market, is how quickly can we understand and take action of the data that's now being presented. And for us to be able to make it timely and clean, and something that's, whether you want to send it off to a customer and put your logo on it and have some edits because it's in markdown capability, very impactful to an organization. Or if you just have a TV up in the SOC, right, and you're monitoring it in real time, these are all applicable ways to use that data. So Paul, thanks for walking me through that. I really appreciate your time today. Do you have any other things that you would like to share before we wrap it up about DarkLight, just anything in general?
No, I don't think I do. Like I said, I think we've covered a whole lot of ground, talked about a lot of different aspects. Again, it's been an interesting journey, and the journey is not over yet. So we have a lot more to do.
That's right. And you know what, Paul, first off, thanks for taking some time out. It was great to just chat with a friend and talk about the cybersecurity market, what we're doing with Cyio, and how we're looking to really reshape the thought process of how we can manage these risks to businesses. So for our audience, thank you for joining us. Please follow us on our social. Check out our DarkLight Instagram, Instagram, and obviously our YouTube. And if you would like to try a Cyio pilot, feel free and let me know. Here's our contact information. We'll be following up with everyone that joined the webinar today. And again, thanks for your time. Paul, thanks again so much for joining us. Everyone, keep an eye out for invites for next month's episode of The Empowered Defender. Until then, stay safe. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.